They were supposed to be God's warriors, men clad in steel, driven by divine purpose, sent forth to reclaim the Holy Land. The Crusaders marched beneath the banner of the cross, believing their mission was righteous, ordained by heaven. But what if I told you that buried deep within this holy war was a betrayal so profound, so twisted, that it reshaped the course of the Crusades forever? An alliance formed not in the name of faith, but forged in shadows between enemies who should have destroyed one another. And yet, they shook hands. This is the story of how desperation, greed, and political ambition birthed an unholy pact between Christian crusaders and Muslim warlords that shattered the illusion of a righteous war. And once this pact was sealed, the Crusades would never be the same again. To understand this betrayal, we must go back to a time when Europe burned with religious fervor and the Holy Land was a chessboard of kings, sultans, and opportunists. The year was 1202. The Fourth Crusade had begun, not to Jerusalem, but with a detour that would mark one of the darkest turns in Christian history. The plan was simple, at least on parchment. The Pope had called for a new crusade, and thousands answered. But these warriors didn't march directly to the Holy Land. They had no ships. They had no money. They needed help. Enter Venice. The Republic of Venice, a maritime empire obsessed with profit, offered its fleet to the Crusaders for a price. That price was staggering. When the Crusaders couldn't pay, the Doge of Venice, an old, cunning man named Enrico Dandolo, offered them a compromise. Instead of coin, they could serve Venice's interests. Their first task? Attack the Christian city of Zara, a rival to Venice. The Crusaders hesitated. This was a Christian city. Sacking it would mean turning against their own faith. But desperation is a powerful force. They agreed. Pope Innocent III was furious. He excommunicated the Crusaders, yet they marched on. The road to the Holy Land was already soaked in betrayal. But the true scandal, the Unholy Alliance, was yet to come. As winter approached, the Crusader camp in Zara received an unexpected visitor. A young Byzantine prince named Alexios Angelos. His father had been dethroned and blinded by a usurper in Constantinople. Alexios offered the Crusaders a deal. Help him retake his throne, and he would reward them handsomely. Gold, provisions, men for their war in the east, and more importantly, he promised to unite the Byzantine Church with Rome. It was a tantalizing offer. The Crusaders, already far off their holy path, listened. And then they agreed. They weren't heading to Jerusalem anymore. They were heading to Constantinople. But this wasn't just a political gamble. It was a betrayal of staggering proportions. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had been a complex ally and rival of the Latin West. And now, a group of Christian knights, fueled by promises of wealth and papal forgiveness, prepared to attack the greatest Christian city in the world. In 1203, the Crusaders arrived at the gates of Constantinople, and with surprising ease, they overthrew the emperor. Alexios IV was installed. But ruling is harder than claiming power. The city hated him. He raised taxes to pay the Crusaders. His people revolted. Chaos erupted. And then the twist. Alexios was murdered. The Crusaders, now without payment, without purpose, and enraged, turned on the city. In 1204, they stormed Constantinople in a frenzy of blood, fire, and greed. Churches were looted. Icons were shattered. Nuns were raped. It wasn't just war. It was desecration. Christian turned on Christian. The holiest city of the East, the heir to Rome, was reduced to ash. And from its ruins, the Latin Empire was born. An artificial state ruled by Western knights who knew nothing of Byzantine politics, culture, or religion. But the damage was done. Byzantium would never recover. And Jerusalem, it was forgotten. This was the Unholy Alliance, a crusade hijacked by money, revenge, and ambition. And yet, that wasn't the end. While the Crusaders occupied Constantinople, the Muslim world watched with a mix of confusion and opportunity. One man in particular, Al-Adil, the brother of the legendary Saladin, took advantage of the chaos. With the Christian powers distracted, he consolidated his rule over Egypt and Syria, building a stronger Muslim coalition. Ironically, the Christian betrayal in Constantinople gave him the breathing room to secure power in the East. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this history isn't the bloodshed or betrayal. It's the quiet deals made behind closed doors. Venetian merchants were granted exclusive trade rights in former Byzantine territories. Crusader leaders took bribes from rival Christian factions. And whispers emerged that some Latin knights had entered temporary truces with Muslim warlords. Not out of peace, but profit. These weren't holy warriors anymore. They were mercenaries. And this wasn't just one moment. The Fourth Crusade marked a pattern that would repeat throughout the later Crusades. Temporary alliances between Crusader states and Muslim rulers became common, alliances of convenience, not conviction. In the Sixth Crusade, Frederick II negotiated the peaceful return of Jerusalem, not through war, but through diplomacy with Al-Kamil al-Adil's son. It was a deal that enraged the church. How could a Crusader king make peace with Islam? But that was the reality. The Holy War was no longer holy. It was a stage for politics, betrayal, and backroom deals. The myth of a pure crusade, of knights riding to defend God's will, was shattered. And in its place, we see the darker truth, that even in wars of faith, human ambition often prevails. Men who claimed to serve heaven found themselves pawns of Venice, Byzantium, and their own greed. And in that betrayal, the Crusades were transformed from a sacred cause into a cynical game. Centuries later, the sack of Constantinople remains one of the most controversial events in Christian history. How could a crusade end with the destruction of a Christian city? How could men who swore to protect Christendom become its destroyers? And yet, perhaps that's the most revealing part of this story. The Crusades were never just about faith. They were about power. And when power whispers, even the holiest of men can listen. As the flames rose over Constantinople, and as the gold was loaded onto Venetian ships, one truth became clear. In the great game of empires and religion, no side is truly sacred. Only the victors write the history. But what about the truth? Sometimes the truth is found not in the light, but in the shadows.